and say welcome to today's event hosted by the Digital Futures for Children Centre. The DFC is a research centre run jointly by the LSE and Five Rights Foundation. So Sir Peter Wanless, here co-chairing today with me, is chair of the Five Rights Foundation, and I lead the centre, and I'm a professor here at the LSE. And we are delighted to be here with the author of the book, who's that we are launching today, Baroness Beeban Kidron, um, of the House of Lords, former founder of Five Rights, and a visiting professor here at the London School of Economics. So the Digital Futures for Children Centre supports evidence base for advocacy. We aim to facilitate dialogue between academics and policymakers and practitioners. We seek to amplify children's voices, and we work within an international child rights framework.
So Sonia's already said the one thing I wanted to say by way of introduction. So that's good. And that's the purpose of us being here today, is to launch an exciting new book titled Users: How Big Tech Took Control and How to Fight Back, written by our good friend Baroness Beeban Kidron, published by W.H. Allen Penguin yesterday. Beeban, as you've heard, I think chairs the Digital Futures for Children's Management Committee, and she is the founder and the honorary president of the Five Rights Foundation, which it's my privilege to chair.
So it's an exciting book because it addresses one of the key challenges of our time. How can we as a society recognize and manage the power and the potential of big tech? And because while it's a hugely informed and cogent text, and it's an intense account, I think, of all that is wrong with our digital world, but it's also a wonderful and lively read by an internationally renowned advocate and activist in the fight to ensure that technology serves humanity, including children now and in the future.
For me, the book confronts at its heart the striking misalignment between the profit maximizing incentives of tech companies and the social conditions which are required for people to flourish. And children, who are our primary focus today, are front and center. At the outset, Beeban reminds us of Nelson Mandela's words that there can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children. The book's already been endorsed by a galaxy of interesting characters. Maria Ressa, journalist and Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Jonathan Haidt, author of The Anxious Generation. Sir Elton John and David Furnish. And Tristan Harris, co-founder of the Centre for Humane Technology. Both Sonia and I have read the book from cover to cover and were overwhelmed by its acute and highly critical, though never dystopian, analysis of today's digital world, as well as by the author's creative determination, even one might say sheer bloody mindedness, to find innovative ways to bring about real improvements.
So Peter and I really look forward to discussing the book with its author. We'll do that for the next short period, and then we will open up for questions that might strike you as we go along. So if you want to get involved, thank you to those already who have introduced themselves. Everyone is welcome. And also please share your thoughts and questions for us to draw on. So to start off, and because most people haven't yet had a chance to read the book, let me note it's in three parts. Part one, as I understand it, describes today's critical juncture as the tech sector's tobacco moment, and long overdue, many think. As the chapter on the lobbying playbook uncovers, the sector has invested a lot to ensure it's unaccountable to governments and to the public. And to counter what Beeban terms tech exceptionalism, since no other sector has managed to evade scrutiny and regulation with such extraordinary success, part three sets out a blueprint for change, for a better future. So, Beeban, how did we get to this critical juncture, to what you describe as a collision between childhood and the logic of the digital marketplace? And we'd love to know when this became apparent to you and why others have taken so long to appreciate the dangers and take action.
Well, can I just start by thanking everyone for coming? Honestly, I feel quite overwhelmed as I'm seeing everyone say hello. I'm in Barcelona, Sicily, America, wherever. So really, really touched that everyone came, and thank you so, so much. And also thank you to Peter and Sonia, who are literally with me in the fight. If this is a war, we're the guerrilla fighters, and you have all three of us today, and indeed some others who I've seen arriving, friends from across the world who do very similar work to the work that we do, or very complementary work to the work we three of us do. Um, but to stop avoiding answering your big question, Sonia, and to go straight to it, I think it's really important for all of us to sort of understand how we got here. Because there was a utopian moment when the internet was invented and sort of sprung from the military labs into the public arena. And so many people thought it was going to be democratizing. It was all going to give us all a voice. And in fact, a lot of its infrastructure and a lot of its foundational principles were actually based on a sort of a sharing model. And in fact, many of them were actually paid for by the public purse. So this sort of sense of it being a democratic technology hung about long after it actually started to get contained by commercialism. And I think that's weirdly, that is the answer to the last bit of your question. Why did it take so long? Well, I think it took so long because the narrative of it being this sort of progressive, equal for all of us kept on going far longer than the reality, which was first, there was a capture of the access, to services. Then there was a capture of social life. Then there was a capture of economic life. And then actually, as the book goes on, and I think that, one of the things that I actually tried to do very early in the book is to show how being mediated by technology changes everything. And I actually use sex as the subject for that, because if it can change how people feel about sex, it can change anything. And so that is sort of my position, is to say, look, it is changing us in real time, and look at how it's doing. So in that sense, I try and lift the hood and go, it's not the utopian ideals I've got a problem with. It's not even technology I've got a problem with. Love the stuff, actually. Yeah. It's what we've allowed it to become. And it's become that really incrementally and sort of below sight. And I think that people are, as you say, I talk about the tobacco moment. I have to say, since the book has got into a few hands, some people have misunderstood my tobacco moment as being, they say, oh, tech isn't all bad, like cigarettes are all bad. And I go, no, 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 no. The tobacco moment was when tobacco stopped being a question of personal choice. And all those court cases came, and they went, who knew what? What was the research? Who was in the way? When did they do it? And it became a toxic product conversation. And so when I am talking about the tobacco moment, I'm saying, how is it that we are allowing in plain sight this toxic product?
Super helpful, because I think I'd perhaps also misunderstood the tobacco moment. So I'm glad that you said that. And I was thinking, so one of the other things I think that has kind of hung on as a legacy that's turned out problematic is that in our guerrilla warfare, or in our activism and policy making, the talk for a long time has been about content. And one of the things that I've learned from you and working with you over the years is your kind of relentless focus on systems more than content, and on regulation more than education, and curiously on data protection originally, sometimes not instead of safety, but as a means to safety. And I just wonder how you came to that analysis, and do you commend it to others?
Well, yes, I do. And I think, I mean, if I can just sort of answer that in two ways. One is, if you actually flip if you flip the question and go, if we treated these things, these services and products like products, then, then we would have product safety. Then we would have consumer rights. Then people would actually test things before they put them in the marketplace. Then they'd be responsible, right the way up to the boardroom. You might even see some people for putting out products that really are quite dangerous. Yeah. And I think that everything in the world, apart from tech, and you said that in your introduction, has a level of responsibility that is not absolute. It's a balance between, consumer or citizen, as I prefer to think of it, safety, well-being, our culture, our rules, our collective democratically arrived at idea of where the bar is. And I sort of challenge people on that question, because they say, but how do you come to a point at which you decide where the bar is? And I go, who decided how far a car must, from 60 miles an hour, how far it has to stop? That is what we decide as being brakes that are good. Someone somewhere decided that less people die if it stops within 30 yards. Yeah. And if it didn't stop for 50 yards, more people would die. But they've made the compromise about 20, etc. And I think this is the point. I think that we have a lot of routes to find consensus on what acceptable is, and yet we're not talking about that. And we'll probably get to the question of evidence and harm and so on. But I think, I literally, and I keep on saying this, if these products were an air fryer, they would have been recalled by now. Literally. Yeah. And then I think perhaps, the other thing, about the privacy and the data protection, I think that a lot of people are seeking to find either technical or governance ways of stopping the harms. And I keep on trying to point out that many of the harms are really a question of turning off certain features that aid commerciality. Yeah. So the extended use, the auto loop, the sending to every, the spreading to everyone, the recommend to you, actually we don't have to invent anything. We have to uninvent a few things. And the example that I like to give, and I talk a little bit about this in the book, my conversations with Jimmy Wales, but let me give the Wikipedia, for all of you who work with children, there are 31 pages on bestiality on Wikipedia. But here's the thing, when you go and look at them, they don't take you to a snuff movie. And when you look at that, they don't take you to a self-harm, and they don't take you, right? And when you leave, they don't say, hey, come back, we miss you. So actually, what we know from decades of I would say, should we say, decades of research and hundreds of years of life experience, that actually childhood is a moment of in which you have to test boundaries, you have to transgress, you have to and that's all well and good. But this is a system that is sort of putting their clutches in and pulling out. And so privacy law, don't take their data, don't serve them things based on their interests, don't extend use for the collection of data, becomes this immensely kind of follow the money sort of governance trick. And so, yes, I do actually think that if we had taken, things like GDPR or the Age Appropriate Design Code and I noticed Liz Denham coming on, so I'm going to do a shout out to the great Liz Denham who sort of fleshed out the AADC when we brought it into being here in the UK. But if we had been really ferocious and serious about that, I think we would have had a lot less both trouble with what's coming on with chatbots and so on, and I think we would have had a lot less content to be dealing with in the ways that are more challenging, let's say.
One thing that comes through really strongly in the book, Beeban, is the centrality of listening to children in the touchstone of your approach, and it kind of begins around your kitchen table and moves on from there. But many of the policymakers we hear from kind of hold that children don't know what's best for them, and at times the perspectives of those representing parents and those representing children have been in apparent conflict. What have you learned from children that should be heard?
Well, I mean, I guess my answer is, what haven't I learned from children? I mean, I've learned everything from children, and those people, who know me well will have heard me say before, there are 15 standards in the age-appropriate design code, and 11 of them were directly in relation to stories and understandings that I got whilst talking to children. And I have been in the room with children when they invented two-factor authentication, long before it was a daily reality for us all. I've been in the room where they go, well, you don't have to get rid of Instagram. You just have to make it squarer so it doesn't see so much of the body, and take out the comments so it doesn't hurt us. It's not the picture, it's the body and the comment, etc., etc., etc. So I think, first of all, any user group is worth respecting if you want to get their needs met. Yeah, it really doesn't matter who they are, and children are no different. But I think that the mistake everybody made in talking about bloody digital natives as if the wisdom of ages is replaceable by two fast thumbs. And so we demanded emotional, economic, risk assessing kind of maturity from children, which they didn't have. And then we demanded, and then we didn't listen to the information and the qualities of understanding that they did have. So that has been really key to my understanding, and it is one of my absolute great pleasures. And I have to say, I was in California earlier this year, and I was waiting for two of the most incredibly famous women in American politics to have a conversation together. It was Nancy Pelosi and Hillary Clinton. But the thing that blew me away was actually two kids, high school kids, who were on the stage just before them. And they were talking about AI, and the young woman said, I just can't help feeling that the tech sector keeps on promising that they're going to solve the problems that they created. Why don't they stop creating the problems? And I thought, out of the mouths, of this, comes the great wisdom. And I have to say, the other two were also great. The other thing that I mean, this perceived conflict between children and parents, I want to push back a little bit on that. I mean, I think there is a lot of conflict between children and parents, but I think it's sometimes a bit misread, and I want to go on record as saying I have phenomenal sympathy for parents who are dealing with this moment in their lives, in the bedrooms, in the kitchens, in the schoolyard, on the way, with what is happening to their kids. And I am not sure that if I didn't have a young teen or a pre-teen kid right now, I wouldn't be ripping the phone out of their hand, because I think it's really, really a properly difficult problem. But I actually think there are some other problems that we're not talking about. So if I had the most important thing I've learned from kids, to go back to the other part of the question, is they say, please tell our parents to put their phones down. Their sense of abandonment from the adults in their lives is palpable to me. Yeah. They feel that they are not seen. Yeah. And now with AI, that's another kind of unseeing, because they can't see their own future. They keep on being told that they're going to be replaced. Yeah. So I think that there is a adult-child problem, but I think part of the adult-child problem is the adults don't see their own behavior and their own addictions and their own problems. I think the other part of it is that adults have been abandoned by the people who they've elected to represent them. Yeah. And we have not helped and we have not sorted the problem. And they are in a battle. Yeah. Just remember, they are in a battle where the adult is there in their kitchen, just as the child is there in their bedroom. But over there in Silicon Valley is an army of behavioral psychologists fighting for their attention. An army. Yeah. And I think that in that you have to say the kids and the parents are on the same side, but they're also being separated by some of the dialogue that we see in the media and some of the I would say false flag fights that are going on right now.
Yeah. Sonia and I have got plenty of questions for you, and we're going to keep going. If you're in the conversation and you've got a question that you'd like us to put to Beeban, then please put it in the chat. The shorter, the snappier, the easier for us to pick it up and put it straight to her, the better. In the meantime, we're hosting this as a research centre, Beeban, and we've probably got a disproportionate number of researchers and evidence gatherers on the call. What have you found to be particularly persuasive in terms of research and evidence when it comes to changing the minds of decision makers in government and industry?
Well, I think what I found particularly persuasive is disclosure in the court cases. You know, what the companies are saying to themselves in unguarded moments has been absolutely revealing. You know, I don't think we absolutely understood that TikTok was addictive within 35 minutes. We understood it was addictive. We just didn't have that number, and they provided that number. So, you know, there's a really good example. But there's a lot of the things that that we have over the years accused them of have come out in disclosure. So I think that's really underrated as evidence, but hugely powerful. And I would probably put the whistleblowers in the same category of hugely powerful, really clear, and from the front line. I think where I think the evidence conversation goes a bit, you know, it gets a bit difficult is twofold. One is, to your last point, we're not listening to children, and we're not listening to parents, we're not listening to teachers, and we're not listening to medical professionals on the front line, and we're not listening to lawyers. And that lived experience is not given the proper weight. And I would say it is disproportionately what we have to go on. Yeah. And I think that is a really big problem in policy that, you know, government goes, oh, well, we've got to have absolute evidence. Yeah. Then we say, oh, but the evidence is with the tech companies who have absolutely no incentive to give it to us. But look, here's everybody else in the community telling you their real lived experience, and you're not counting it, you know, as real. So I think I would like to see people give more weight to that kind of evidence. And then finally, I think I think some people have done remarkable work, and whether it is despite the companies, you know, doing avatars and pretending to be children and all that kind of, you know, inaction research that Five Rights has been very sort of on the front foot about, or the kind of research that we've done at DFC that actually looks at what's happening, say, in Kenya at the same time as what's happening in Germany and same time as what's happening in London. And actually you start to go, well, isn't that interesting? We always thought that context was everything, but it turns out the context is provided by the companies, by the services. So a kid in Kenya is having the same experience as the child here because they're on the same platform, and the platform is the determiner. And again, I think that was hugely mind-blowing to some of the people who I've been in the room with, you know, politically, when they suddenly realized that it was the design and not the child. Yeah, that the child was keeping on having this, every different kind of child was having the same experience. You know, so I think all of those things are really important. You know, I am a bit worried about some of the some of the research, some of the things that pass for research. So an example was, and I'm gonna probably say the name wrong. So Sonia, you can shout out if I get it wrong. But a couple of years ago, the American Society of Science.
American Academy of Pediatrics.
It wasn't pediatrics. It was, they did. I'll tell you what the essay question was social media harmful? Yeah. And I remember them giving, I was in, the lead author gave, an account, presented the thing, and they said there was no evidence, right? And when we asked the questions, and I swear to God, I ended up with my, out my ears, because one of the things that they managed to conclude was that social media wasn't as bad as not having enough sleep. So nobody gets a prize for my question about did they look at how social media interrupts sleep? And they went, no, that wasn't in their remit. And so I'm furious about and this was really, really important evidence that went in the front page of every newspaper around the world. So I think that where I couldn't be more, I mean, my whole involvement with DFC, my very long association with Sonia and all the colleagues there at LSE, my association with the Oxford AI Ethics Institute, and so many colleagues around the world, it could not be more important, but boy, do we have to be tough about what the question is. And I just keep on feeling we're not always asking the right question here, and therefore we don't have the right evidence.
I'm going to now pick up some of the questions in the chat. And Beeban said before we came on, are you going to ask us about the ban? And I said, I don't think we'll need to, because you will be asked about the ban, and indeed you are. So we have several questions about what you think about the ban and its advocates. Or what do you think about plans to limit young people's social media use, which is another way of putting it. And a kind of rider to that, which is how do we make the alternatives, quote, sexy? How do we make policies and regulation that maybe have more nuance or more parts to them also appealing in the way that the ban definitely has become? If we want to, and you may not want to.
Yeah, no, I think you know my answer on this, Sonia. I mean, so I have been marching around the places that I inhabit saying, let's ban the companies from giving toxic products to children. Let's not ban the children from the digital world. And that might seem like not very much of a difference, but for me, it's everything, because the problem with the media version of the ban, which I don't believe ultimately is where we're going to end, just FYI, but the problem about the media version is that they want to know whether TikTok's going and Snap's going and this one and that one. And I kind of go back to my car analogy and go, I actually really would like every car to have good brakes. I don't really want just Toyota and Porsche to have good brakes and let the other guys off. And I think the other point I would absolutely make is, I don't know, I can't remember exactly how long it took for TikTok to go from this to this, but it was really quick, and it was quick. It was quicker than a parliamentary sort of process. And when we come to ChatGPT, it was almost like a miracle how quickly it took off and how quickly it was in the hands of children. So my real point would be, if we pick off these 11 companies or whatever it's going to be, what are we going to do about the company that hasn't been invented or is about to be invented that we don't even know the name? Yeah. And are we not just regulating the last decade that we failed to regulate rather than this? Having said all of that, I do not believe that we should be putting the products as currently designed in the hands of children. I think they are really toxic. So I think that how I see this, I absolutely, to the part of your question that says, what do you think of the people who brought the ban? I go, chapeau. They campaigned, they were activists, they made it happen. And in my, and in the book, I do actually have a sort of a collection of heroes. And Albanese is one of them, the Prime Minister of Australia. And, it's not like a big deal, there's loads of people who've done wonderful things. But why he is one of the heroes is because he was a political leader who did not stick to the orthodoxy and said, not on my watch will children be treated like this. Yeah. Now, whether he did in detail the right thing is absolutely arguable, and I'm probably one of the people who's going to argue it. But what I do think is that he is part of making, child online safety an absolutely central thing to governments all over the world. And Sonia and Peter, we've been trying to do that certainly I've been doing it for a decade and a half and so on. And we didn't get there yet. So as you talked about it earlier, I say quite a lot about lobbying in the book. That's a lot of the reason that we didn't win. Political compromise, that's a lot of reason we didn't win. But I think that this is now a truck that's rolling down the hill without brakes, and we will get child online safety. And what we have to do now is make it work properly and reasonably for children. And people keep on asking me, so what happens if they all just raise the age to 18? I go, great, new market, new things, new tech, that treats them privately, respectfully, safely, age appropriately. I'm happy with that. And what's more, whoever said, the alternatives be sexy, I just want to say that kids who have a hobby, this is the research, yeah? For kids who have a hobby of any kind, collecting cards, playing a game, playing a sport, being an actor, a musician, I don't know what kids do, making things out of matchsticks, it doesn't matter. They are happier and have a better time than the kids who don't. So some of the alternatives will be online and hopefully better versions of online. And some of the alternatives will be actually going to, back to cutting up cardboard boxes and, whatever it is that anyone really wants to do. Maybe even talking to each other.
I was going to come to the chapter on the 10 plays of the big tech lobbying playbook, Beeban, which is a compelling, racy read, and I had kind of chapters of my life flashing before me as oh yeah, that's what they were doing, and I guess and drawing on a couple of the other questions that have come in about the ban. It kind of, the playbook doesn't stop, does it? Because when the ban doesn't work, it will be our fault for posting things which we shouldn't have posted, or failed to educate our children properly, or children's fault for dodging the ban and breaking the law to get themselves into places that they shouldn't be. And this goes on and on, doesn't it? So do you want to say a little bit more about some of these techniques and what we might do individually or collectively to call them out, perhaps more effectively than we've done up to now?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of questions in there. I do think, just to pick out on that point about, it'll be our fault. I mean, this is another part of why I said we got to ban the tech companies from giving toxic products rather than kids is, if this is on the kids and the parents, it won't work. I'll tell you now. I mean, it might be a great cultural move that parents feel they have the law behind them. And I do think that a lot of parents say to me, I just want to be able to say it's not allowed. And I really respect that, and I really get that. And that is, I can see why that matters to them so much, and I support it. But actually, if it is left to children and parents, then that's the government giving up, because the whole point is that we've got to hold them to account for who they are contacting with their toxic product. So just to put that in one box, you know, so yesterday someone contacted me about, about a big piece of work that's going on around the place to do with all of, not to do with directly the band, but to do with thinking about the future and how we might do a more proactive approach rather than a reactive one and so on. And they said, we'd really, really like you to lead that piece of work, with experts in various fields across the thing, but we don't feel we can because you're a known activist. Yeah. And I bring that up because it's sort of it's one of the things that I talk about in the lobbying playbook. Why is having a former executive of Amazon running the competition authority, why is having a former person, in fact, two people from Google and YouTube running the BBC, why is the regulator being peppered with people from tech and the Department of Science and the lobby groups that they do listen to? Why is that not imbalanced? But it would be imbalanced to get someone who fights for children's rights, for tech democracy, etc., etc. And I think I tell that story, partly it made me mad and made me laugh simultaneously, because it was literally like the kinds of stories I tell, which perhaps with a bit more drama in the book. There's quite a lot of very, upfront stories about lobbying. But I think it shows you the sort of the way it poisons the well, because even the solutions are now sort of modulated by what tech could possibly imagine rather than what we want. And I think that just, as an advocate for children, as an advocate for a better world of tech, for someone who loves tech but wants it to be democratically accountable, I endlessly feel that the increments by which people are looking at it are defined by what people think tech will do rather than what we want. Yeah. And so that's where I sort of come out with that. And I think that those of us on this side have to be relentless and creative, and they've got the money and they've got the posters and they got the politicians and they got, and so we have to be, sort of, absurd and demanding, but it then has a cost of a different kind. So I think it's a difficult battle, but Sonia's heard me say this before, but it's a joyous battle. It's a joyous battle. The people in the battle are, come with principle and energy and certainty of what good looks like. Yeah. They come with refusing the status quo. And, and I find that it goes from, bitter to absurd to victorious, like that, on a sort of a weekly round. And I try and live in the victorious. Yeah. I quite like the absurd, I must admit, but it's important not to be bitter, because I think bitter is accepting the status quo. And now I feel I didn't quite answer your question, but maybe I did.
I think you did. There was loads there. I think Sonia should have a turn.
Well, well, I just let you know, Beeban, that the chat is now very lively and full of questions, and we're not going to be able to get to them all, but I'm going to gather together a few as what I think is really a question now about regulation.
Yeah.
Uh, what do we push for next? What can it do well? And what role should civil society have in kind of calling for particular kinds of regulation, or indeed keeping their eye on the regulator in making sure that that is going well?
So I I think the first and most important thing, and I know it sounds pretty basic, but the first and most important thing is I would like everybody to win the argument for regulation, period. Forget what it is for a second. And the reason that I say this, and I think this is maybe a bit of a theme in the book for those of you that do read it, is it's, you know, a lot of the book is about trying to dismantle some of the binaries, some of the narratives that we are given. Yeah. And one of the narratives we're given is that regulation impedes progress, and that it's a choice between regulation and progress. But it's not. It is a choice between regulation arrived at in a democratic form and living by the terms of service of Silicon Valley. It is privately designed regulation. It is not regulation, right? And if, you know, I mean, you know, I'm not much of a just one thing kind of person, but if there was just one thing, that would be it. Let's win the argument about what we're talking about. The other thing is, the other big kind of thing about net regulation is this idea of progress. And again, there is a chapter called Progress. And I try and talk about what is progress, you know, because actually in my world order, and, you know, I'm sure not everybody agrees, but many of you will, the world being owned by five guys in California is in no way a step towards progress for me. Yeah. So the progress we're being asked, and I look at it in a much more less crude way than that, but what we're being asked to accept as progress is not necessarily what we want. And I show in certain places how actually they're also killing innovation. Because if you cannot actually make a living doing the right thing, yeah, then actually it incentivizes everyone to do the wrong thing. They keep on buying up. I think I do have the statistic in the book, but can't remember off by heart. But, you know, 1,000 companies they've bought in the last few years, right? And they do it, they're called shark attacks. They do it to absorb or kill the innovation of people who might challenge their authority. Yeah. And so on. And so actually, even in this sort of, you know, the bit that everybody always sort of pulls out of the hat as being the great thing, which is medical progress, which there are also things to say about that. And indeed, it is an area of great excitement, but there's also a lot of things going on in that area that are less than. But even in that area, we can see that the minute that one of the big companies get involved, you know, the amount of actual innovation, real innovation, rather than market capture, attention capture, goes down. So regulation is a balancing thing. And do you know what? It can change and it can shift, and it will move according to how you vote and who the leaders are and so on and so forth. But it is ours. Terms of service are theirs. Contracts are theirs. So, you know, and we have to decide what progress we want and what regulation we want. Having said all of that, in the kid space, I am a passionate advocate of safety by design. And I go back to my thing of we may not be perfect, but these guys are, and I use the word guys advisedly, you know, they're pumping out what they call MVPs, minimum viable products. So why is it that we have to have longitudinal studies to prove that it's harmful? We don't. We have to have minimum viable regulation that actually says, test your product. These are the things that we know about children. Yeah. Free play, freedom of thought, privacy, And if we can't see it, then you can't roll it out. And so my big regulatory thing is safety by design, call them products. Let's have be responsible for it. Let's have consumer rights, etc., etc. And I just keep on going back there. It's not perfect, but where we are is so poor that we're not able to be sophisticated. And in a way, that's a lot of what we've seen in this big debate that I know has upset you. I know it's upset a lot of people around banning, because actually you want something better. But actually, if we're in this really critical moment, we've got to, first of all, deprive them of their market and then force something better.
And are these, I think I know what to say to this, but I want to ask are these principles transferable across different technologies as they emerge? So there's anxiety in the questions about chatbots and longitudinal relationships as opposed to immediate moments and harm. There's anxiety about AI more broadly and what AI is already doing in terms of capturing children's data and all the rest of it. Have you found as you've been on this journey that there are some kind of universal principles that can be applied and can be applied in a forward-looking way, or are we always going to be having to catch up with the latest technology which we don't yet understand?
Yeah, I mean, well, the short answer is yes, we absolutely, if we're talking about democratic principles, if we're talking about what we know from 70 years of child development, if we're talking about, you know, our cultural preferences in the broadest sense of, you know, privacy and security, you know, these really big things. Yeah, absolutely. They all go right across. And I think that, you know, I had a very chilling conversation with a bunch of, you know, safety engineers at one point. And there's one company saying, oh yeah, we train our models, you know, on this, that, the other, all to do with, you know, different kinds of, you know, advice to children. And the other guys come from a different company and go, no, we don't do that. Well, what the hell? Why are we building products and putting them in the hands of children if you don't even bother to do the training? Yeah, then we can get to how difficult is the training and how, you know, how perfect it is. And I will say this, you know, I am probably of the view, and I don't know how controversial it is, but there is a role for parenting, and there is a role for self-discipline, and there is a role for, you know, other pieces of this equation. But that starts after you get a product that has really done its best to be responsible, not instead of. And I actually you know, that there's a couple of bits in the book about, you know, my quite unlikely but very close friendship with Jeff Hinton, who is one of the godfathers of AI. And I was with him last week, and he said to me, you know, it was a decade since one of the big companies came to me and said, you know, how difficult would it be to send children a different kind of set of images to adults? And they were talking definitely about sexualized images. Yeah. You know, not necessarily child sexual abuse, but maybe pornography or whatever. And he turned around to them and he said, to get it 95% right would be trivial. To get it 100% right would be almost impossible. What did they do? They didn't bother with the 95%. Yeah. So, you know, I'm not here saying that there is a perfect world, and we all live in a world which is so palpably imperfect, where children are hurt and are damaged and do live in conflict and are hungry and da da da. All of this, you know, we cannot say that we're going to create a perfect world here. But I just do not understand why it is morally, politically, economically acceptable, yeah, to be creating another world in which children are so disadvantaged. And I'm sorry, I can't really read the questions and talk and hear you, but someone at one point said, but what about the rest of us? And I just want to say, that's exactly what the book says. It says you see it through children most clearly because they have no electoral capital, they have least life experience, and they have bizarrely most rights, and so are being most offended in a sense. But actually, what goes on online does not stay online, it comes into the real world. And what starts with children is just coming for the rest of us. And that is really the point of the book. And I hope that I illustrate in ways that are, I just really want to say to you all, I didn't mean to write a book. I wrote most of it at 4 o'clock in the morning, many mornings. But why I wrote it was because I felt we hadn't got a big picture story about how this is all connected. And I had been doing a big campaign about creative copyright and the politics of, ripping off people's creative work. And I suddenly realized the people who are worried about democracy, the people who are worried about information integrity, the people who are worried about jobs, the people who are worried about children, even the people worried about the high street, we're all in the same battle. And so the book is to actually link us and say, we are the army, we are the power, we are the people who are going to change this world. And this is how we're going to do it. But you have to see it as all being one, and that's why I have worked so hard over the last few months, not always with 100% success, but I have worked so hard to bring together the children's rights community, with the parents and on this thing, and not let this be a division between us. Say, this is an amazing moment. Let's use it politically to walk forward and keep arguing. Mainly what people are doing is headlines. We've still got to fight for the detail. And as they say, God is in the detail.
Beeban, there are lots of questions that Peter and I still have, and lots of questions in the chat, but we are approaching the end of the hour. And I wonder, is there anything we haven't discussed about the book that you would like to kind of make sure that we pay attention to? For those who are sympathizing with Beeban for her 4 o'clock in the morning writing stints, I'll let you know it's a long book, it's a big book, and it has so much that we haven't quite touched on, but we have already dealt with many things.
It doesn't take very long to read once you get started, though. It's a
No, that's
racy,
true.
it's a racy read.
No, I think maybe the thing that we haven't, and thank you for your questions, and thank you for being here, and thank you guys for your question. I think the only thing I would say is, when we get to the last bit about how to fight back, I do put, 12, my 12 actions for a flourishing world, at the door of regulators, governments, the institutions of state. And, and I want to say about that, we've lost power in increments, but that's a clue because we can get power back in increments. And I think a lot of the time people are saying to me, they want one big thing, and that's why the ban is so attractive, isn't it? They want one thing. But actually, we have to do a lot of things. And the good thing about that is that there's a lot of us and we're in a lot of different spaces. And so I actually put forward things that the government and so on can do. But actually, I also list separately some of the things that we can all do. And and I literally mean whether it is asking questions at work about the technology that's being imposed on you, being a school governor and actually checking what it is that is happening in the school and making sure people understand, and right down to, you can actually have a one app in, one app out policy. You can actually leave your phone in the corridor. You can actually use tech as a collective mean, because that is actually one thing that maybe hasn't come up, that a lot of the research shows that if you use tech together in groups, whether you're kids groups or family groups or whatever groups, and even things like, the wonder that is Zoom, that is allowing us all to speak right now, actually having times of day, an appointment to speak to Granny, yeah, rather than always being available, and getting rid of the idea of always being available. So from the absolutely ludicrous to the why don't we actually tax locally, because then they would be subject to our laws, yeah, is what I come up with at the end. But I don't want to pretend that, you know, that this is, you know, how we rule the world. But I think it just does indicate how much power we're not using. And, you know, because the book came, this is today, this is publication day, but in anticipation of this day, I've done a number of things like, you know, go to South by Southwest and talk to audiences and so on. And it happened accidentally the first time. And ever since, I have asked, you know, who voted in the last election in their country based on tech policy? Zero. More than 2,000 people I've spoken to in various settings. Nobody. So I think that what I would probably end with is, this is our attention. It's an attention economy. Spend it wisely. Spend it as you would wish it to empower. Yeah. And those of us who are lucky enough to live in democracies, actually, you know, we do know that the public can make politicians change their mind, and be an activist with your own vote, and let people know that next time you are going to vote on very specific things around tech. And when I say it in the book, one of the things I say, I don't mean what they say and where their sympathy lies. I mean what they're going to vote on as a party. And, you know, I'm sitting here in England, you know, we're about to get a new prime minister, but, you know, every single party, I sit in Parliament, every single party knows that we've got a triple lock on the elderly to keep them, you know, keep them comfortable. Yeah. And everybody knows that's the wrong policy. We should have a triple lock on youth. Yeah. That is the only triple lock we should have right now. None of them will do it because of the votes. And I only say that not to kind of divert, but to say really seriously, the electorate, what the electorate wants actually matters. And so we are the army, and we can get what we want. We've just got to start using the power we have.
Those of you who don't work with Beeban closely will have will now have a sense of how exhausting, but how challenging and productive it is to work with her closely, and get a sense that there is a huge agenda ahead. There is always a huge agenda ahead, but I think in the book you have made that super articulate and so clear and compelling that we are all in your debt for this. So this has been the last. We need to close the event now. We will keep all your questions. Thank you, and send them to Beeban so she knows what you wanted to ask. It's our last event for the year, so I hope we're not going to be up at 4 in the morning working, but take a bit of a break. We will have a summer meetup on the 30th of July. We'll let you know. We'll post the video on our website. And I just want to say a very warm thanks to the DFC, to LSE, to the Five Rights teams, to Peter, and especially to Beeban. Thank you.
And thank you all